On a bright afternoon, two corrupt officers unjustly target a young black woman, using their authority to accuse her of a crime she didn't commit. They drag her out of her car with no explanation or apology, leaving her bruised, humiliated, and shaken. Just as the tension builds to a breaking point, a surprising figure steps forward from the crowd, turning the entire situation around. Who is this person, and why does their presence force the officers to reconsider their actions? Before we dive into the full story, drop a comment below to let us know where you're tuning in from. It was a sunny day when Jasmine, a 23-year-old woman with a bright future ahead of her, was driving home after a business meeting. She had always been proud of her accomplishments, her degree, her job, and the opportunities that lay before her. But today, as she made her way through the busy streets, she had no idea that her day was about to take a shocking turn. Out of nowhere, two police cars appeared behind her, their sirens blaring. Jasmine's heart raced. She hadn't done anything wrong. She always made sure to drive safely and obey the law. But now, for reasons she couldn't understand, she was being pulled over. The two white officers approached her car, their body language aggressive. They accused her of speeding, though she had been driving within the limits. Jasmine tried to explain, but they weren't interested in hearing her out. "Get out of the car, ma'am. Now," one of them demanded, his voice sharp. "Why?" "What did I do wrong?" Jasmine asked, her voice shaking. Without responding, the officer wrenched her from the car and slammed her against it. Jasmine felt a surge of panic. This wasn't right. She could feel the sting of racial profiling, the weight of discrimination pressing down on her as they forcefully pushed her to the ground. They didn't care to hear her side of the story, dismissing her completely. In the distance, the murmurs of a growing crowd echoed. Onlookers observed as tensions mounted, some pulling out their phones to document the unfolding scene, but no one dared to intervene. Just as the situation seemed ready to spiral further, a voice sliced through the tension. "Stop." It was deep, authoritative, one that commanded immediate attention. The officers paused, momentarily startled, as they turned to see the figure standing just a few feet away. It was none other than Dwayne Johnson, the well-known actor and former professional wrestler. The crowd parted as he moved toward the officers, his face stern and unyielding. Dwayne Johnson wasn't just a celebrity, he was an outspoken advocate for justice. He had condemned racism, inequality, and police brutality time and again, but seeing it unfold before him in real time was different. He wasn't about to stand by and watch. With deliberate calmness, he approached the officers. His presence was undeniable. He locked eyes with one of them, who momentarily faltered under his gaze. Dwayne's voice was steady, yet carried an unmistakable authority. "Let her go." The officer hesitated, clearly rattled by the arrival of such a high-profile figure. The crowd had swelled, whispers floating through the air, some recording, others murmuring in anticipation. But Dwayne wasn't concerned with the spectacle. He wanted the officers to understand the seriousness of their actions. One of the officers, still gripping Jasmine's shoulder, scoffed. "She was resisting arrest, sir," he claimed, though his voice lacked conviction. Dwayne's eyes narrowed in disbelief. "Resisting? Are you serious?" His voice dropped to a low, dangerous whisper, carrying so much weight it felt like a physical blow. "I'm giving you one chance to let her go. If not, I'll be taking this to a much higher level." The officer seemed to consider his options for a moment, but the crowd around them was growing more agitated, and the sight of Dwayne Johnson standing up for Jasmine was not something they could ignore. Without another word, the officer released Jasmine, who was trembling but trying to maintain her composure. She could hardly believe what had just happened. Was this really happening? Did Dwayne Johnson just intervene on her behalf? The officers, now visibly shaken by the presence of someone so influential, stepped back. They didn't dare challenge him further. Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest as she looked up at Dwayne, who smiled reassuringly. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft now, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. Jasmine nodded, too stunned to speak. She was grateful but still processing everything that had just happened. The officers slowly walked back to their cars, clearly embarrassed. They knew they couldn't get away with what they had just done, especially with someone like Dwayne Johnson involved. The crowd had dispersed, but the energy in the air was still palpable. Jasmine turned to face Dwayne, still in shock. "Thank you," she finally whispered. "No need to thank me," Dwayne replied with a smile. "This shouldn't be happening in the first place. Nobody should ever be treated like that." As they stood there, police sirens began to wail in the distance, but this time they were heading elsewhere. Jasmine couldn't help but think about how quickly things could have escalated if Dwayne hadn't intervened. She had been powerless, just another victim of prejudice and systemic racism. But now she felt like her voice had been heard, even if only for a brief moment. Dwayne glanced at the camera crews who had gathered, trying to capture the scene. "Make sure this gets out," he told one of the reporters. "Let people see what happens when the system fails. Let them know that we won't stand for it." The media would soon pick up the story, but Jasmine didn't care about the fame or the attention. She was just grateful to be alive, to have survived a situation that could have gone horribly wrong. Later that day, news outlets across the country ran stories about the incident. Jasmine's face appeared on TV, but what really captured the public's attention was the way Dwayne Johnson had stood up for her. His actions were a reminder that even in a world filled with injustice, there were still people who would fight for what's right. A few days passed, and the world seemed to be buzzing with reactions to the incident. Some people praised Dwayne for his bravery, while others criticized the officers for their overreach. Jasmine, however, remained quiet. She hadn't spoken to the media, and she had no intention of doing so. What mattered now was finding a way to heal from what had happened. One morning, as she was scrolling through her social media feed, she noticed something strange. The police officers who had assaulted her were now facing an internal investigation. There was talk of their suspension, and some even speculated they might lose their jobs. It seemed that their actions, while initially swept under the rug, had now caught the attention of those in power. But it wasn't just the investigation that caught Jasmine's eye. As she dug deeper, she found out that one of the officers had been involved in a similar incident years ago, a case that had been quietly dismissed. Karma had finally caught up with them. It was a strange feeling, knowing that justice was moving in her favor, even if slowly. Jasmine couldn't help but wonder if things would have been different if Dwayne hadn't stepped in. Would the officers have gotten away with it? Would she have become just another statistic? As the weeks went by, Jasmine found herself reflecting on the events that had unfolded. She had never expected to be caught in such a situation, but in a way, it had changed her. She had been a victim, yes, but she had also witnessed the power of standing up for what's right. The incident had brought her closer to understanding the deep-seated issues that still plagued society. And as for Dwayne Johnson, he had kept his word. He had made sure the world knew what had happened, and his bold intervention had sparked a much-needed conversation about prejudice and racial profiling. The story wasn't over for Jasmine, but it had shifted her perspective. In the end, she knew that this experience wasn't just about what happened to her, but about what it meant for everyone who had ever been unjustly treated. The truth would always come to light, no matter how hard some tried to bury it. And sometimes, karma had a way of making sure that justice, however imperfect, would eventually find its way. If you enjoyed the story of Jasmine and Dwayne Johnson's bold intervention, make sure to check out our next story that will surely captivate you. Click here to watch it.